Well, good morning, folks. Welcome to your Rangers Review morning briefing for Thursday, the 15th of July. That's the date I've got in front of me, Johnny. How are you doing this morning?
Yes, good. It's good. Obviously, the website was launched yesterday and went really well, so we're really happy with the feedback we've got. I think we were doing the video yesterday. I probably looked like a slightly ashen-faced and concerned because we were having a few technical difficulties in the morning, but everything was ironed out, and by the time the afternoon came round, obviously all our content was up for the world to see. So hopefully you're all enjoying it and you're perusing all the stuff that we've got up there, and we've got plenty more to come today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll start with that, Johnny. Part one of our exclusive chat with Pedro Caixinha has went live this morning. Some really interesting takes in it. You spoke to him, obviously, Johnny. Before we get into the points, what was your impression of him? How was the chat? How did he come across?
Well, the first thing I would say is Pedro is a brilliant talker. He's got a bit of charisma about him, and he's the kind of guy that when you spend some time with him, you find him very engaging. You know, he's entertaining. He's quite funny. So it's obvious to see why he smashed his Rangers interview out the park, despite not having a high profile over here in the UK. He's a very engaging and affable guy, and he was really good to deal with. And he gave me an hour of his time, and we sat down and went through the vast detail of his reign. I mean, the thing about Pedro is you really need 8 hours to properly go through it, because when you ask Pedro a question, he tends to give you a 10-minute answer, as journalists who interviewed him for press conferences back when he was at Ibrox will recall. But it was a really interesting sit down.
Yeah. The first bit that stood out to me and the first bit in the interview is his chat about his tactical philosophy, what he wanted to imprint at Rangers, and interestingly why he felt it went wrong, Johnny, which wasn't necessarily that it was his ideas, but maybe he felt that they weren't embraced properly in Scotland. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I thought he was quite interesting on his ideas, because he was at pains to stress that despite the fact he's talked about tactical periodisation in the past, that being his philosophy, which is a kind of, if people don't know, it's kind of an academic philosophy that Portuguese coaches use. It was originated in the University of Porto by an academic called Vitor Frade, and since then it's been used all across Europe. But it's quite a complex methodology. But one of the things Pedro said was, look, I'm not an absolute advocate of tactical periodisation. I like to take parts of it and utilise parts of it. And I think that broadly it is tactical periodisation, but he was talking about how in certain areas tactical periodisation doesn't necessarily work. For example, there's nothing in the tactical periodisation about set pieces. So he was saying, look, and that's a huge part of the game. But the philosophy or methodology is quite complex, and it's about setting up the training for the specific game that you're playing on the Saturday. So every bit of training that you do is geared towards an opponent, and there's no fitness training. The fitness training is integrated into the training. And Pedro was quite open about the fact that players just did not buy into his methods. He feels that in England, where there's been great success with these methods, for example, with Jose Mourinho, but also people like Nuno Espirito Santo, who's the manager of Tottenham now, who's a great success at Wolves. He feels that they're more open to new ideas down there, and he found it quite. People were quite closed up here in Scotland to accepting this kind of new methodology. But what I would say to that, as a counter to that, and this piece is very much Pedro's opinion, but as a counter, I would say Brendan Rodgers is an advocate of tactical periodisation, and it works pretty well for Celtic during his tenure.
Yeah, he also went on to speak about his fraught relationship, shall we say, with Kenny Miller. It was interesting because it kind of did shine a light on what he called the fractures in the dressing room at that point, Johnny, and I guess shone light on his relationship with Kenny Miller as well.
Yeah, well, we've seen so many players come out and talk about this, haven't we? We've seen Clint Hill, Nico Cranchar, So I think it's important to say that it's not just Kenny Miller who's talked about these issues in the past, and Pedro certainly openly admits that there was a fairly serious schism in the dressing room there between the players. It's clearly a difficult for him, a difficult one for him, and a difficult period. Mm-hmm. But he feels that Kenny was rewarded with a new contract. When he arrived, he was impressed with Kenny and what he had to offer on the pitch. And he sat down and said to him, Kenny, you need to accept that we're bringing in new players in the summer, and you might not be playing every game, but you're a key part of the squad, and you're a key lieutenant for me. I'm paraphrasing, but this is what Pedro told me. And he feels that Kenny just didn't buy into that, and he feels that Kenny let him down with that regard. So there's no doubt that Pedro feels Kenny's responsible for it, but I think we know that Kenny has an alternative opinion to that, and he's spoken about, he's been critical of Pedro's pre-season training setup. Yeah. He's been critical of the appointment in general, the way he was handled, and we know that those two just, ultimately had a pretty serious falling out by the end of it. So the thing is, I think we've heard everyone else's take, so it's interesting to get Pedro talking about it and give his verdict on what actually happened. Everyone else has had their say, so now it's time for him to give his opinion.
And just before we move off the Pedro piece, which of course you can read on the Rangers review site, what did it change your judgment of him, Johnny? Because I certainly I don't know if I remembered him too fondly. I remember I think was his last game was a 1-1 draw at home with Kilmarnock when Chris Burke went up the other end and scored, and I just remember in the main stand the velocity of it was not a pleasant place to be. Did your impression or perspective of his time in charge change when you heard his point of view of what went wrong?
Not really. I've kind of always felt Pedro was a fascinating character and clearly a good coach. He's won 5 titles in Mexico, and the Mexican League is a good league. I would say, if you look at some of the data around the Mexican League in terms of like financial spend, the quality of players that they have there, I think it's a better league than Scotland. Certainly not a worse league, that's for sure. And he's done very well with 2 different clubs in high-profile positions at big clubs. So he's got ability as a coach. There's no doubt about that. But he was just in the wrong movie at Rangers. I think it's really difficult for any coach to come in with 2 or 3 months left to go in the season and take over a group of someone else's players and try to force them into adopting a completely new philosophy. I think if you're going to do that, you need to do it right at the start of the season. A new broom type thing. You can bring your own. You've brought in your own players that you know are not going to be suitable or already out, and there isn't a snowball effect which creates negativity, which is what happened to Pedro and ultimately losing to Progress Niederkorn in the second game of the first qualifying round of the Europa League that season. By that point, because of what happened the season before, all the goodwill had evaporated, and he was kind of on a hiding to nothing at that point. Yeah. But I think it's important that there isn't revisionist history about Pedro's time. I think Pedro himself admits, it didn't go well, and he's accepting his responsibilities. But that's not to say that Pedro is a useless coach, because I don't think that's true. I think clearly, just looking at the CV, you can tell that the guy has something, and I just don't think that it was the right time or the right club, frankly.
Right. For him. Right. Okay, fascinating. Well, as I say, check out that the first part of a 2-part interview with Pedro Caixinha on the Rangers review site. It's going to move on, Johnny, to the Scottish Government's response to the ticketing fiasco. They've stressed the Euro 2020 capacity limit at Hampden were set following extensive advanced planning and to take account of the international significance of the games. And I'll just read out one specific little bit of this quote. So a spokesperson told the PA News, the Euro 2020 matches at Hampden were flagship events approved by the Scottish Government. The process is designed to enable a small number of internationally significant events to take place in 2021 and appropriate COVID-19 mitigations in place based on extensive planning across multiple organisations. This process does not apply to regular domestic football matches. So if you're not aware, this is in response to Rangers putting a statement out because they can only have 2,000 fans for Saturday's home match against Arsenal. First reaction to that quote, Johnny?
Well, I mean, yeah, cut through the noise in that statement, the nonsense in the statement, the sort of PR element of it. And they're just basically saying the Euros was really important and the domestic games aren't. That's what they're saying, ultimately. I have they honestly gone to Rangers and other clubs and said, here's the hoops that UEFA jumped through. If you want 12,500, you'll have to jump through them too. I'm pretty sure the clubs would do that, or certainly the big clubs would. Totally. So I just ultimately think that it's a political situation, and if you're looking for common sense or a through line whereby this all comes together and it's fair, then you're not going to find it, because it's not consistent. It's a mess. And I get that the government have got bigger fish to fry when it comes to a global pandemic and dealing with the very real life or death decisions that they have to take. But football clubs are an important, hugely important part of Scottish society, a really big part of Scottish everyday life, a huge impact on the mental health of the nation. Encourage getting out and being healthy and taking part in exercise and do loads of work in the communities. And these clubs have been starved of revenue. And the quicker and the more they can do to get people in, surely that's a good thing. Surely they should be doing it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and just really frustrating that the first sight of fans in Ibrox will be such a small number. But I'm sure it'll still feel louder than 2,000. I've no doubt of that. Just finally, John, we're going to speak about. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I think ultimately it'll be amazing to get even 2,000 fans back in, and you'll probably be shocked by the amount of noise that creates. And 2,000 absolute diehards back after such a long time getting to watch their team. It'll still be good, but you just look at the sheer size of Ibrox and all those stands. I mean, you can't tell me that it would be. It's outdoors. I mean, yes, I know they have to walk through concourses, but people are in and out. I just can't believe that there's any kind of science behind this idea, given that we can all go to Silverstone Shopping Centre or East Kilbride Shopping Centre or whatever one you want to pick in Glasgow. Other shopping centres are available. And you're indoors with thousands, maybe 1, 2, 3,000 other people walking about an area.
Right.
So it's
totally
confusing and inconsistent.
And there's been a fan zone in the city centre for a month, with benches pretty close together. So share your frustration. Just finally, we will speak about Brian Rice speaking about the Colts teams who had their proposals rejected by the SPFL, and basically for league reconstruction and to join the league in 2022-23. Rice has come out and said things like this set us back. You look all over Europe and there are Colts teams or second teams playing in proper leagues. The youngsters benefit playing competitive football in a league structure. Scotland benefits in the long run, so keep pushing. If you give up, what message are you sending to the kids? Really interesting comments, Johnny. I know we touched on this yesterday, but just that first line there in particular, things like this set us back. It is really disappointing, isn't it? Especially when yesterday we spoke about how the statement coming out was that the proposals from the Colts team fell significantly short.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's that's 100% the case. Brian Rice is absolutely spot on. Look, one of the things that you hear old footballers talking about, or older footballers, is the reserve league and what it was like to play in that league. And not only were you sitting alongside experienced pros who would talk you through a game and give you their insight and help you along, but you were playing against grown men in that reserve league who would play hard, play fast, and be looking to impress to get back into their first team or to recover properly from injury. And that really sharpened the generation of young footballers. Now, we know it was different times. Squads are not capable of holding, that level of, I don't think that level of kind of like a reserve team. And I think that the money just isn't there to have the same experience as you would have had in the 80s and the 90s. It's just a different world. So you can't bring that back. And it frustrates me, frankly, when I hear pundits on BBC or Sportsound or whatever it is going, we just need to bring back the reserve league. No, we don't need to bring back the reserve league. You can't bring back the reserve league. It's done. But what you need to do is try and recreate the environment that led to those players developing. And that is by putting young players up against men. And I can't think of a single coach that has poo-pooed the idea that this will help young players develop. Actually, what this is really about is typical Scottish football tribalism, and we don't want Rangers and Celtic players getting developed down here. They've got enough money, they've got enough quality. Why should Stranraer, why should Peterhead, why should Albion Rovers help develop Old Firm players? That's their take on it. And the problem is that backing that up is their fans aren't that keen on the idea of playing Rangers and Celtic Colts, because they say, well, it's a bounce team. It's a bounce. Would feel like a bounce game. It wouldn't feel like Albion Rovers against, one of the other teams, like Stranraer or something like that. So, I can understand that, but at the same time, I would say, look at someone like Caledonian Braves. If they came up, they're a new side that's just been built out of nothing. Would they have a problem playing against them? Probably not. And the Colts, I think it would be absolutely fine, to be honest. I think once it got up and running and once people got used to it, they would be absolutely fine with it. But I'm totally supportive. I mean, what do you think, Josh? I mean, you've been involved in youth football. I mean, is this a way forward?
I just would tend to agree with you that I don't really see the firstly, I don't see the negative. I also see that there might be a revenue advantage to these Colt teams playing in the lower leagues that we heard so much about when Rangers were down there. But yeah, it's confusing because as you say, there doesn't seem to be many voices that argue why this would be bad for players' development necessarily. It just seems to be a lot of noise surrounding it. So I tend to agree with you. And as Brian Rice said, I think it would be the best for Scotland in the long run. But who knows if we'll get there? We'll just have to wait and see. But we'll keep you up to date with all of it, won't we, Johnny?
Absolutely. Listen, we've got a comment there from G. Arthur, who's saying SPFL clubs have to get together and do more to get fans back at football. That's something I totally agree with. G's comment is 100% right. I think there needs to be cross-club agreement that they pressurise on this. I know that it's only maybe a month before fans will be back. Hopefully, if things go well. Yeah. But I don't think there's any reason why they can't put more pressure on to get more. I mean, 2,000, it's just not enough. It's not realistic, given where we're at. Hospitalisations have gone down. ICU patients have gone massively down with the vaccine. I just think we need to be a bit more sensible about this, given what we've already had, and there doesn't seem to have been a spike on the basis of that. And I just think it's time to put a bit more pressure on.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Okay, great. Well, I think that's all we have time for this morning. Johnny, thanks for your time. We will be back tomorrow morning with your Friday morning briefing before the weekend. In the meantime, stay up to date with us across our socials, and we'll speak to you tomorrow. Cheers.